Hi guys, welcome back to the series Verbal Ability and Reading Comprehension for Cat by me Angad Singh. You can follow me on this link and please do rate and review the lesson series. Thank you so much. And this is the lesson 4 on odd one out of sentence exclusion. Let's get started with question number 1. Okay, fashions the tools, acts of blossom, suffering fruit, man is made or unmade by himself, true application of thought, okay, destroys, wrong application. Okay, let's read it properly. So it talks about something about creation by man or something, I don't know. On one hand, he fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions of joy, strength, and peace. Okay. Act is the blossom of thought, and joy and suffering are its fruits. Okay. Man is made or unmade by himself. This is a very crisp opening sentence, probably. By true application of thought, man ascends to divine perfection, but by wrong application of thought, man descends below the level of a beast. Okay, so this is some sort of some sentence of wisdom, some words of wisdom. On the other hand, in the armory of thought, okay, on one hand, okay, on the other hand. So these two sentences, 1 and 5, could make a pair. On one hand, he does this. On the other hand, in the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. Okay, so sentence 1 and 5 have to be there in the paragraph. Else, because both of them cannot be excluded, there's only one excluded sentence. So this is good that we know that both of them will be included. Act is the blossom of thought, and joy and suffering are its fruit. Okay, man is made or unmade by himself. Okay, both of them could be opening sentences, but the hint that I got about sentence 3 being the opening sentence was when I read sentence 1, that that it's talking about man building something, that he himself fashions the tools that with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions. Okay, so and sentence 2 is also talking about something related to it, that okay, act here, I think it means action, that action is the blossom of thought, that thought leads to action and actions lead to joy or suffering. Okay, by the true application of thought, man ascends to divine perfection, but by wrong application of thought, man descends below the level of a beast. Okay, so clearly let's start off with sentence 3, because if we start off with sentence 3, then we can decently move on to sentence 1-5. So 3-1-5 is a good sequence. Man is made or unmade by himself. On one hand, he fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions. On the other hand, in the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. Okay, so one thing that you can notice is what I do is I read the sentences aloud over and over again, which gives me an idea of what would be suitable if we were actually writing it. That if we are conveying it to somebody, how would we want it to be? So that is one thing that has helped me, that you must have already noticed. Okay, so we were at one hand and on the other hand. Act is the blossom of thought, and joy and suffering are its fruits. By true application of thought. Okay, so 1 out of 2 or 4 will be the excluded sentence. Let's see which one. Okay, on the other hand, in the armory of thought, he forges the weapons by which he destroys himself. Act is the blossom of thought, and joy and suffering are its fruit. I think sentence 2 will be the excluded one, because sentence 4 is taking forward the contrast which is shown by sentence 1-5. The 1-5 sequence is being concluded very beautifully by sentence 4, is it not? On one hand, he fashions the tools with which he builds for himself heavenly mansions. On the other hand, in the armory of thought, he forges weapons by which he destroys himself. By true application of thought, man ascends to divine perfection, but by wrong application of thought, man descends below the level of a beast. Sentence 2 could have come somewhere. I don't know, but I think if you're talking about the remaining 4 sentences, sentence 2 looks like the excluded one to me. Let's check. Yeah, sentence 2 is the excluded one. Why? It was not a very easy one. Checking 2 or 4, the confusion between 2 and 4 is very justifiable. It's not a very easy one to catch. I could get that 4 is a part of the sequence only because I could see that 1 and 5 are there and 4 is taking forward the idea. Otherwise, 2 could have acted as the ending sentence. But just because 1-5 sequence was being very crisply ended by sentence 4, it is the one that will be there. So that makes sentence 2 a little bit out of context as compared to sentence 4. So let's move on. Jim Corbett hunted down tigers that had turned man-eaters in Kumaon, Uttarakhand. Okay, tourists visit Corbett Park. During his time, visitors can do this. The best thing about being in Corbett is that there is never a dull moment. Okay, let's read properly. Jim Corbett hunted down tigers that had turned man-eaters in Kumaon. Tourists visit Jim Corbett National Park mainly during the months of November to June. Okay. The best thing about being in Corbett is that there's never a dull moment and you can do many interesting places. Fine. The Corbett Park also invites people for adventure activities like rock climbing during this time. During what time? November to June. Visitors can explore Indian wildlife through jungle safari available. Okay, so I can see that 2 and 5 have some link, that 2 will come first and then 5, that tourists visit Jim Corbett National Park during the months of November to June. And during this time, they can explore Indian wildlife through jungle safari. Okay, so you can also see that sentence 4 is taking it forward, isn't it? That, apart from the jungle safari, the park also invites people for activities like rock climbing, rappelling, and river crossing. Many interesting places around Corbett. Okay. Jim Corbett hunted down tigers that had turned man-eaters. Clearly, one is excluded. All 4 sentences are talking about the national park, and this is talking about the person Jim Corbett, that what he did, that he hunted down tigers. So this sentence would probably come, if suppose this was an essay, this sentence would come somewhere where you're talking about the naming of the park, after the name of Jim Corbett. Why was it named after Jim Corbett, the person? What were his achievements? That he hunted tigers which turned into man-eaters for this long. So this is a fairly easy one, that sentence 1 is excluded. Can we form a sequence out of the remaining 4? It's a no-brainer. Sentence 1 is clearly the excluded one. I don't think there's even a need to check the correct answer. But let's see if we can make a sequence. We already have a sequence between 2, 5 and 4. 2, 5, 4. Let's see where 3 is gonna fit. The best thing about being in Corbett is that there's never a dull moment and you can head to many interesting places around Corbett. This could be an ending sentence. That the park also invites people for adventure activities like rock climbing and all. And the best thing about being in Corbett is that there's never a dull moment and you can head to many interesting places around Corbett. Okay, so these 3 sentences, 2, 4 and 5. Yeah, 2, 4 and 5 talk about what happens inside Corbett, and sentence 3 talks about it. There are interesting places around Corbett Park also. So sentence 1 is the excluded sentence. Yeah. Okay, so I hope this lesson was helpful. Thank you. Hi guys, welcome to lesson 5 on the topic odd one out or sentence exclusion in the series Verbal Ability and Reading Comprehension for CAT. You can follow me on this link and please do rate and review the lesson series. Let's get started with the lesson number 5. Okay, so question 1. So I can see that they're talking about hedge fund managers, industry, something about finance, some talent. Okay, There is no doubt that hedge fund managers have been good at making money for themselves. With keen eyes and sharp brains, they spot and exploit inefficiencies in the markets. Okay? They, hedge fund managers, clearly. Hedge fund managers are the smartest investors around. Okay? Or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. What does the industry tell its clients? Okay, so this sentence tells me that there is some sentence amongst these three that should be stated as a fact, and then in sentence 4 you say that okay, this is a fact, or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. Okay, there is no doubt that hedge fund managers have been good at making money for themselves, or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. Why would the industry tell its clients that hedge fund managers are good at making money for themselves? Okay, let's check sentence 2. With keen eyes and sharp brains, they spot and exploit inefficiencies in the markets, or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. Sounds good. Let's see if 3 4 could be a pair. Hedge fund managers are the smartest investors around, or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. Okay, this could also be it. So clearly 1 4 is not fitting, but 2 4 could fit, 3 4 could fit, and also if we take 2 3 in conjunction and then follow it up with 4, would that not fit? Let's just check. If you're talking about they spot, then it has to be preceded by either 1 or 3. Okay, so just look at the possibilities here. If you want to end with 4, let's assume that we end with 4, and also we need sentence number 2 in the sequence, then 1 out of 1 or 3 will have to precede it, because okay, they spot. So these are the two sentences that talk about hedge fund managers. So at least 1 out of these two should be there. Or the sequence could comprise of sentence 1 2 3. Lot of possibilities. Confused, fully confused. Let's check again. I still have a hunch that sentence 4 will end the sequence, because you need to use 2 out of these 3, and you can do that if you end it with 4. So I would still go ahead and put sentence number 4 at the end and look for 2 sentences out of these 3. I'm just trying permutations, that's it. Hedge fund managers are the smartest investors around. You can start off with this one. Okay, sentence 1 should be the odd one out, isn't it? Because nobody is talking about the selfishness of hedge fund managers. You're talking about talent of the hedge fund managers, and that is what sentences 2 3 4 do, isn't it? Sentence 1 is the only one which is not talking about the talent of hedge fund managers, but about how good they are at making money for themselves. This is more in a negative sense than talking about the talents of hedge fund managers. If we start with 3, follow it up with 2, and then end with 4, that would be a really good sequence according to me. Hedge fund managers are the smartest investors around. With keen eyes and sharp brains, they spot and exploit inefficiencies in the markets. Or hedge fund managers are the smartest investors around. With keen eyes and sharp brains, they spot inefficiencies in the markets. Or at least that is what the industry tells its clients. So 3 2 4 should be the sequence, and 1 should be the odd one out. Yeah, correct. Let's move on. But as access to textbooks, teachers, okay. But as access to other texts is enjoyed more widely, some of the dominance textbooks now enjoy will wane. Okay, so you're talking about how textbooks will become obsolete, something related to that. As indeed will the power of teachers, whose prejudices may often be just as ingrained as those found in textbooks, and rather harder to pin down. Okay, so you're talking about how teachers are manipulative and how textbooks are also manipulated, but the prejudices that teachers have are harder to pin down. Okay, fine.
It won't be long before children will be able to access, by way of smartphones, the textbooks prescribed for their courses. Okay, so this is also talking about how textbooks will become obsolete. Okay, as long as textbooks in one form or another are used, and as long as they are issued and approved by the state, they will remain a political issue. Okay, political issue. So this is in line with sentence 2. Yeah. Alright. So dominance textbooks now enjoy will wane. Okay, so I think sentences 2 and 4 definitely need to be there together, because you can exclude only one sentence, and sentence 2 and 4 together talk about how prejudices and political issues, state coming into picture, teachers bringing their views into textbooks, uh, teachers bringing their views into the classrooms along with textbooks. So these two sentences should be there. So this is the central theme of the paragraph, because at least half of the sentences are talking about it. This is the only sentence that doesn't talk about the prejudice or the manipulation or the dominance of textbook. It is only talking about how textbooks will become obsolete. Initially, I thought that sentence 1 was also talking about it, about that same thing, but no, it is talking about another kind of dominance waning off. So that is not it. But as access to other texts is enjoyed more widely, some of the dominance textbooks now enjoy will wane. Okay, so earlier there was some sort of a political dominance or some prejudice being imposed on the children through textbooks, but now that dominance will wane. So the sequence could be rather harder to pin down. One will not start, but it will talk about something contrasting because it starts off with a but. Okay. Can we start off with 4? As long as textbooks in one form or another are used, they will remain a political issue, but their dominance will wane. As indeed will the power. Okay, I didn't even notice this. Will wane, as indeed will the power of teachers. Okay, so the power of teachers will also wane. Clearly, 3 has to be the odd one out. Simply looking at the structure of the sentences, that okay, the dominance of textbooks will wane, or as indeed will the power of the teachers. I should have noticed this when I was reading sentence 2 itself. So 412 will be the sequence. You can see why that this is an opening sentence, that okay, as long as textbooks are approved by the state, they will remain a political issue. But now you're talking about a contrast, that okay, their dominance will reduce. And also, what else will reduce? The power of teachers, whose prejudices may be harder to pin down. Sentence 3 is talking about something completely different. So 3 is the odd one out. Yeah. Let's move on. This was a good question. Okay, a lot of text, 5 sentences. Through a series of such disciplines, mental, emotional, and moral, he exercised his small embryonic freedom. Who? Until it grew larger and larger, until he had more freedom than his captors. Okay, somebody was held captive, probably. He would describe himself in the classroom in his mind's eye and give his students the lessons he was learning during his very torture. Okay, so we're clearly talking about someone who was held captive and tortured. They had more liberty. Who had more liberty? More options to choose from in their environment. But he had more freedom. Okay, somebody had more liberty, but somebody else had more freedom, more internal power to exercise his options. Okay. Frankel. Okay, so Frankel is probably the guy who we are talking about. Frankel was a determinist raised in the tradition of Freudian psychology. Okay. In the midst of his experiences, Viktor Frankl would project himself into different circumstances, such as lecturing to his students after his release from the death camps. Okay, so this is the guy who was held captive in the death camps of Nazi Germany. Viktor Frankl is the guy we're talking about. And clearly, we would start off with sentence 5, because this is the only sentence which introduces Viktor Frankl. So as we checked in the series on Parajumper, clearly you'll start off with sentence 5 instead of sentence 4. You will mention the full name first rather than just the surname. So, assuming that we start off with sentence 5, which will be the following sentence. Okay, let's read out 5 once more. In the midst of his experiences, he would project himself into different circumstances, such as lecturing. Okay, so we are talking about how Frankel was projecting himself into different circumstances, such as lecturing to his students. So, what does he do? Okay, so sentence 2 talks about how he describes himself in the classroom and give his students the lessons he was learning during his very torture. They had more liberty. Who had more liberty? Okay, captors. Where will sentence 4 be then? Is this the excluded one? Because if you're talking, okay, because 1 comma 3 is a very good sequence that uh, he exercised his freedom larger and larger until he had more freedom than his captors. Beautiful contrast is coming in sentence 3 that they had more liberty, more options to choose from, but Frankel had more freedom and more internal power to exercise his options. That his captors had more liberty, but Frankel had more of this. So Frankel was a determinist raised in the tradition of Freudian psychology. Clearly, this is the excluded sentence. You don't want to talk about how he was raised, but you're talking about what Frankel does, how Frankel uses his experiences in his classroom after his release. So you're straight away starting off from his release and what follows in his life after that release from the death camps. You don't want to talk about how he was raised in a tradition of Freudian psychology. So this is clearly the excluded sentence. Yeah, correct answer. So this is it. Let's hope this video was helpful. Thank you. Hi guys, welcome to lesson 6 on Odd One Out in the series Verbal Ability and Reading Comprehension for Cat. You can follow me on this link and please do rate and review the lesson series. Thank you so much. Let's get started with the lesson number 6. So one question, okay, that is too much text. Let's start reading it. I see a lot of existentialism. Okay, so one thing is that I am not intimidated by the topic itself. A lot of people think that, okay, existentialism, a lot of, let's say, I don't know, psychology, what do you call it? But that is what I have been trying to convey through the entire lecture series, that the topic is more or less irrelevant, whether it is politics, whether it is sports, whether it is current affairs, whatever it is, history, geography, whatever topic comes, the sequence can be solved using basic common sense, and that is what I'll hopefully try to deploy here. Existentialism is nothing else but an attempt to draw a full conclusion from a consistently atheistic position. Okay. In existentialism, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation. Okay. And confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world amidst despair, angst, instability, alienation, and boredom. Okay, I am already bored. Existentialism is the work of philosophers like this guy who, despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that philosophical thinking begins. Oh my god. What is this? Okay, I need to focus harder. Despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that philosophical thinking begins with the human subject, not merely the thinking subject, but the acting, feeling, living human individual who is solely responsible for giving meaning to life and living it passionately, sincerely, or authentically. Oh God. Many existentialists have also regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies in both style and content as too abstract and remote from concrete human experiences. Experience. Okay, I have absolutely no clue how to proceed on this one. So let's read it over and over again. Maybe we'll stumble upon something. So this is a classic example of how I get clueless. This is how I have been clueless in my MBA exams also, but somehow probably I worked my way around. Let's hope it works out this time also. In existentialism, the individual's starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of apparently meaningless or absurd world. You are introducing what existentialism is here, is it? No, you're giving some detail about existentialism, that okay, in existentialism this is what happens. So if you're taking something about existentialism forward, you should have probably talked about it first. Existentialism nothing else but an attempt. So this is a very harsh criticism of existentialism. So this is not going to be the starting point. Even 2 is not going to be the starting point. Yeah, clearly 3 is the starting sentence, because this is the only one which introduces what existentialism is, where it stems from. So it tells that okay, it is the work of philosophers like this guy, who, despite profound doctrinal differences, shared the belief that okay, philosophical thinking begins with the human subject, not just the guy who thinks, but the guy who acts and lives his life passionately. Okay, now it has started to make some sense that okay, sentence 3 is the only one that can actually start the whole sequence. Many existentialists have also regarded traditional systematic or academic philosophies in both style and content as too absurd. Okay. Here in sentence 1, the author is directly criticizing existentialism himself. In 4, is he criticizing it himself, or is he just quoting what existentialists regard traditional systematic or academic philosophies? Okay, got it. Here in sentence 4, traditional philosophies, traditional systematic or academic philosophies are being criticized. In sentence 1, you're criticizing existentialism itself. Can 3, 2, 4 not be a sequence? Because I don't see any reason to criticize existentialism here already. Would you do that? Or would you go ahead with 3, 2, 1? We'll have to read it. And that is the problem with very verbose sentences, because I have a habit of reading the sentences over and over again and seeing which is the appropriate sequence in as per the casual conversation that we engage in. So this is going to consume time. Existentialism is the work of philosophers like this guy, who, despite profound doctrinal differences, did this, that okay, it's not just the human being thinking guy, but also the guy who lives. Fine. The individual starting point is characterized by what is called the attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion. Okay. Clearly sentence 1 is the excluded sentence, isn't it? You're talking about drawing conclusions from an atheistic position. There's no reason for you to talk about such harsh criticism already. You've just introduced the topic. You've talked about what existentialists do, what these philosophers do. You're not gonna criticize the topic as a whole already. You just introduced it, haven't you? Many existentialists have also regarded other philosophies as too abstract and remote from concrete human experience. All right, beautifully connected. That okay, you were talking about how it is not just the thinking guy but also the guy who acts. So you can relate it to human experience here. So it could be, the sequence could be 342 or 324, but one, I'm pretty sure that one is the sentence that is gonna be excluded. That okay, you talked about how it is the work of philosophers like this guy who, in spite of differences, begin with the human subject, not just the person who thinks but also acts and lives. And then you move on to human experience. And then you say that, okay, the starting point is characterized by what has been called the existential attitude, or a sense of disorientation and confusion in the face of an apparently meaningless or absurd world, amidst despair, angst, absurdity, alienation, and boredom. One is the excluded sentence. I'm not sure whether it would be 342 or 324, but clearly one is the excluded sentence. Yeah, correct. Not an easy one at all. Let's move on. This theory says that, which theory says that between you and anything you want to accomplish, there is a constraint or a limiting factor that determines how fast you get to where you want to go. Okay. 80% of your constraints will be within yourself, and 20% of the constraints will be outside yourself, constrained in other people and situations. Okay. The speed of which at which you will pass through this bottleneck will largely determine. Okay, I see Eliyahu Goldratt. He's the guy who. Okay, theory of constraints. Okay, I've studied this in the course production and operations management. So constraint management is a topic I've studied. Okay, so I know his theory that you need to focus on the bottleneck. Okay, the speed at which you will pass through the bottleneck will largely determine the speed of your entire journey, of course. Would you want to start off with sentence 4? Eliyahu Goldratt described an important breakthrough in thinking in his book, The Goal, described as the theory of constraints. Okay, so straight away you can go to 1, can't you? This theory says that between you and anything you want to accomplish, there is a constraint or a limiting factor, which is the bottleneck, that determines how fast you get to where you want to go. Then can you go to 3? The speed at which you will pass through this bottleneck. Which bottleneck? Limiting factor will largely determine the speed of your journey. 80% of your constraint will be within your. Why do you want to talk about where the constraints are? Let's check 5. If you're driving down a freeway and traffic construction is narrowing all cars into a single lane, this bottleneck or choke point becomes the constraint. Okay, got it. 5 will come first, and then this is the bottleneck which you will refer to in sentence 3. 4, 1, 5, 3 is the sequence. 2 is the odd one out. It became easier because of 2 reasons. One, that I already have the sequence with me. Second, that I was able to identify that, okay, the constraints that you're talking about, you're describing the constraints. That, okay, where the bottleneck is, that is your primary focus. You're not going on describing the constraints, where the constraints lie. That is too deep. You only introduce the constraints. You're only starting to explain the constraints. So sentence 2 will be the odd one out. Let's check. Yeah, correct. Let's have a look once more how we arrived at the answer. Of course, you need to talk about the author and what theory he has proposed. Clearly, sentence 1 is going to follow because of this theory. This theory says that, okay, there is a limiting factor. Then you explain the limiting factor in detail. Okay, just see that this sentence is explaining in layman's terms what a bottleneck is, and then only you can go ahead talking about the bottleneck as if you've known about it, because you've already introduced it in very simple terms in sentence number 5, that if you're driving down a freeway and traffic construction in a narrowing all cars into a single lane, this bottleneck or a choke point, so now this is how you've described the bottleneck, becomes the constraint, determines how fast you will get to your destination. So this is the conclusion, that okay, the speed at which you will pass through this bottleneck will largely determine the speed of your entire journey. Clearly sentence 3 logically follows sentence 5, so sentence 2 will be the excluded one. So this is it on odd one out or sentence exclusion. I hope this series was helpful. Please do rate and review the series so that we can take into account the feedback for the upcoming lesson series on para summary. Thank you so much for watching.